Welcome to Now We're Getting Somewhere. I'm Katie, and I'm a certified life coach, but I've also been a management consultant at McKinsey and a product manager at a tech startup. In other words, I know what it feels like to have a life that looks pretty good on paper, but doesn't feel as good as I want it to. I help my professional clients develop lives that are more meaningful, happy, and also more successful. And I want to share the same practical insights with you. Let's go. Buddy. Oh, how are you doing? I am recording this on December 5th, and I am proud, happy to say that the holidays have arrived in my household. In fairness, this is really like 97% due to my husband, who, I don't know if anybody else is like this or knows someone like this. My husband doesn't really care about most holidays. Like, he's not going to decorate for Halloween. He doesn't even really care about birthdays. Even his own birthday, he's kind of like, yeah, I mean, I guess you can buy me a cake if you want to. I don't really care. But he is serious about Christmas. Like, he is serious. Right after Thanksgiving, we got to get the tree. He wants to get the tree decorated. Now he has taken on decorating the exterior of our home. Like, I respect. I think when I was growing up, my parents probably wouldn't even get a tree till maybe like a week before Christmas, but we've got the tree, we've got my menorah out. It's just like the holidays have arrived, and one of my kids in particular is like just sort of developed enough that he really gets it, and he's excited to like participate in all the different parts. So it's feeling pretty special. So I knew you're going to get this a little bit later, but I hope that if that's something you enjoy as part of this time of year, that you are enjoying it. So this week's podcast is about a very specific observation. I want to share a very specific observation that I've noticed for a long time. And honestly, I didn't talk about that much because for a long time, I thought it was so specific, it just didn't apply to everyone. No one would care. But recently, I shared this idea in a large group of women that I'm in. And a bunch of people in that room were like, whoa. And I'm realizing that maybe it applies to more of us than I had previously thought. So I thought I would share it here as well. And also, for some people at least, it has maybe some interesting implications during the holidays. So I wanted to share it now in case it's something that you can really hold in your heart at this time of year. So this observation, this specific observation, as I said, is about people who grow up in generally warm, loving, functional families. So it's not about everyone, it's about those kinds of folks. Of course, growing up in loving and warm and functional families of origin, it's a blessing in so many ways. And yet I have also observed that people who come from generally loving and functional families will sometimes have a very specific set of problems that I would put under the high-level category of some pieces of individuation happening quite late. And just to quickly define individuation, there's obviously many definitions of individuation. We could talk about it in philosophy, in Jungian psychology. But when I talk about individuation, I mean the process of mentally, emotionally, sometimes just in terms of how we spend our time, becoming our own separate people who are distinct from our family of origin. An individuated person doesn't have to be distant from their family. That's not what I'm saying. They could still spend lots of time with them, feel intimate with them, but they have their own separate, distinct identity, their own separate sense of self. I've noticed that sometimes for people who come from generally wonderful, loving families, it can take quite a long time, sometimes even into the 30s and 40s, to make certain individuation moves that other people may have made in their teens or certainly by their early 20s. And to be clear, as an aside, when I talk about individuation, I don't believe that individuation or valuing the individual is the highest goal or good in all circumstances. American culture in particular can value the individual above all, obviously, but not all cultures are like this. And there, of course, are certain downsides of an overemphasis on the individual above the community or the family. So I don't talk about individuation as something that's always the most important thing in all circumstances. But I have noticed in my personal life and in my coaching that a certain category of person, again, somebody who's often from a really functional, loving family, will sometimes have a certain category of problems that I would boil down to pointing to a need to individuate a bit more than they have yet. So I want to give a couple of examples of what I mean by that, of some things that I have seen happening on the later side, 30s, sometimes 40s for these kinds of people. The most common one by far is just being very concerned about a parent's opinion about your path in life. Feeling very, very influenced in your path, whether that is choosing a partner, that kind of path, or navigating a career, or even deciding how you spend your time on your weekends, but being influenced in any or all of those things by your parents' opinion. Maybe it's your parents' opinion of your finances, how you should make financial decisions. So in this way, you're kind of still a satellite of your family of origin, of your parents. A secondary symptom of individuating quite late is not only caring a lot about their opinion, but perhaps being very intertwined with one or both parents in terms of advice. Like they still give you a lot of advice about some part of your life. It could be a very specific part, like just the finances, or it could be many parts of your life. And you take that advice very seriously. They are still perhaps the most important source of advice, or at least the primary source of counsel for you. And if you're like, oh, but I love my mom's advice, totally get it. I'm not objecting to that. Just hold on a second. But yes, I will get to that. But the third sort of general category I've seen in terms of individuation happening quite late, and this has been coming up around the holidays that I've noticed, is maybe not feeling like it's okay to settle into your own family unit or your own decisions around time for the holidays. I was just talking to somebody who has a husband and 2 young kids, and she comes from this really awesome, warm, loving family. And her mom has all of these incredible, wonderful holiday traditions. There's caroling and there's cookie making, and the house is decorated so fun and beautifully for the holidays, and there's other wonderful traditions. And on one hand, this woman is feeling a pull to do her own holidays at her own house with her own little family. She's feeling kind of an urge that it feels very authentic to her to do that. But honestly, she doesn't have the time or the energy to do as much stuff as her mom does. And she feels this weird sense of like, well, shouldn't I just go do everything with my mom? Like bring my little family to do all my mom stuff? Like, isn't that where Christmas is with my family of origin? She doesn't really feel comfortable sort of saying like, no, I'm just going to do my own thing. And so I want to pause here to allude to, as I previously mentioned, like there's nothing inherently wrong with continuing to be kind of intertwined with your family of origin. Like maybe you love getting career advice from your mom. Maybe she has incredible career advice. Maybe you super value your dad's opinion above all others about your life path or your finances. And that can be awesome. And maybe you love spending every single holiday and vacation with your parents. Maybe that's amazing. I still spend a bunch of holidays with my parents. This doesn't have to be a problem. So let's be very, very clear about this. None of this has to be a problem. We don't have to detach from our parents' advice or spending time with them or anything like that. But also in my observation, it can be a problem at times. There can come a point when you are suffering because you are quite intertwined with your parents in a way that perhaps doesn't serve you anymore, perhaps is overly influenced by their opinions or advice, and it's just not working for you. And you might benefit from individuating a bit, detaching a bit from their opinions, cultivating your own separate self. And again, I think this problem is extra weird. It's extra hard to tease out if you do come from a family that's generally supportive and helpful and loving. Like maybe throughout your life, your parents have given you good advice. They know a lot of stuff about how the world works. And some of them are even really great listeners we've been calling them our whole lives to give us advice. It would be easier on some level if maybe they had been giving you really bad advice that was obviously not right for you for your whole life. Maybe you would have detached from that advice at 19, but now you're 32 or 42 and you're still calling your dad for career advice or calling your mom for financial advice. You know, I noticed this for me on some level. Like my parents, for much of my life, like had a lot of good ideas about how to live a life in a time when maybe I didn't know how to live a life, like high school or college or something like that. But then at a certain point, and I still talk to my parents quite intimately and they still give me advice and all of that. But at some point, the balance had to kind of shift. And I did have to kind of like separate myself and come into my own sense of like, I'm going to take my advice first and foremost. And mom and dad's may just be like something that kind of comes in, but is not my primary source of counsel for me. Or in this holidays example I just spoke to, again, this can be a problem that's particularly hard to tease out when we have these parents that throw amazing holidays or invite us on amazing vacations. And again, this doesn't have to be a problem. Maybe you love their amazing vacations, but at some point, maybe you feel like, it's time for me to do my own thing, but it feels crazy to turn down these amazing, wonderful experiences or holidays. So overall, I share this observation for two reasons. One is, I think by the time we are in our late 20s and certainly in our 30s or 40s, we often are not thinking about individuation as an activity that we might be up to. We kind of intuitively felt like the individuation happened maybe when we left for college at 18. But I have observed that for some people who feel themselves in this kind of like friction or weirdness, maybe in subtle ways with their family of origin, it can bring a lot of relief when they hear me say, oh yeah, you just haven't individuated yet in this way. Because then they realize that they are in a human developmental stage that is not unique to them. And actually, they may be even doing this on the later side, at least within American culture. Again, not all cultures are like this, but in some cases, certain kinds of suffering can be relieved by allowing yourself to individuate. And for many people, what they might be feeling at 27 or 37 or 42, for other people, they already did that at 17. So other people are just way past this. And it's not too late. You can totally do it now if it's something you want to do. And as an aside, before I move on to the second reason, I will also share that I have many clients who are of Asian descent, and many of them have told me that individuation is less of a value, perhaps for their parents and in the cultures they come from. Their parents, these clients who are of Asian descent, their parents don't necessarily expect them to individuate as much as the average American or the average Western young person might expect to. It's just sort of not a thing that is done as much. So that can be also a really interesting discussion. It's sort of a little separate from this podcast, but it can be a really interesting discussion with my clients to say, what do you think about individuation? Is that something you want to explore more? Or do you like that you're perhaps not doing it as much? Like, what would be your preference? But to even bring that idea to the table. But that was kind of the first reason. I think just even naming that individuation is a human developmental stage that they might choose to go through can be very relieving to many people. And the second reason I name it is that, look, individuation can be painful. The kind of satellite detaching from the main hub, if you could see me, I'm kind of like pulling something connected apart. There can be moments or seasons of pain there. I do not think it will be fundamentally painful forever. And in fact, I think there can be more closeness and warmth and intimacy when we feel separate and like we have perhaps some boundaries if we are needing on an intuitive level to feel a little bit more separate. But there can be a process of, when you're pulling apart that, man, it hurts. And once we kind of separate, we might both need to heal some wounds a bit and learn how to be before we can be together with the same comfort and ease of before. So the second reason I share this high level is just to say, hey, if it's painful, that's normal. And also it probably won't be painful forever. And once you heal, again, you can come together with more closeness, just in a different way, on different terms, where you can hold yourself a bit more. So if you feel a little distant and you want closeness, I would also just hold tight if you feel like you are on the right path, because you might need to come apart a bit more, even just emotionally, in order to come back together. So that's it. This observation, as I said, obviously doesn't apply to everyone, but maybe it applies to you, or maybe it applies to someone you care about. I think that often when we come from wonderful, loving families, we think that there are no problems. We just have blessings. And look, there are lots of blessings to that situation, no doubt. But all of life has light and dark. And what I'm talking about is sometimes a slightly surprising part, maybe a slightly surprising dark part of that process. So I hope it's helpful for you. I will be thinking about you as you navigate your holidays. I'll be rooting for you. Until next time. If you really want to change in a meaningful, lasting way, that's when you need a life coach. Every client I've worked with has had incredibly personalized reasons why they're in the tired or anxious or stuck or uninspired state they're in. Working with me can help you identify those roadblocks, which are usually blind spots that you genuinely cannot see, and implement a profoundly customized, doable plan for overcoming them. I have a very small, high-end, one-on-one coaching practice. If you'd like to be my next client, reach out at katiesiever.com. I'd love to meet you.